لم نبكي ساعة الوداع.
صارت الفوضى بهالقهوة كله يوسف.
أرملة قال له ماشي، راح سأل عنها، قال له جوز هالمرة صياد فقير.
تنوع هذا الفيلم اللي ورا لازم نحكي عنه.
على خبر حق الرومانية
وقلوبة الأراجيل والخناديل، وفي يوم من الأيام لقي حاله أو خليل بعد ما إنه وصل للحوت
والله العظيم هالحمار هلكني، لطول ما هو ماشي هو يكب بهالدهب.
إننا لمينا كل بتوع الحمام
بالشام وجبدة الحايك زين بالزين اللي زينها ما يشبه الزين. السلطان اعطاهم العرش وقال لهم وخروه.
يكون صوت زي الناس كمل.
It's evening here in Stockholm, Sweden, and it's getting dark. But we are kind of used to darkness here, at least this time of the year, when autumn has come and winter is approaching. Yes, darkness. But I kind of enjoy it. Sometimes I sit out in my garden and watch the last leaves falling, turning their colors from dark red to brown and even black. And even though those are the colors of death, they have their beauty. I like this season. But from what I've heard, in the beginning of this world there was just one season, one only, and that was springtime. And it was one eternal day, the sun always on the sky, little white clouds passing by. It was beautiful, the blueness of the ocean, the mountains in the distance, the rivers, the lakes, and the forests, always green and blooming in all the colors of the rainbow. And at the same time they were bearing fruit. And the world was filled with life, animals and insects, the deer running over the fields, the tiger chasing it, and up in the mountains the mountain goats jumping from cliff to cliff. Beautiful. And the gods who had made all this, they were of course proud and satisfied. But most pleased were they because of the two humans they had made. They were twins, a brother and a sister, Yama and Yamuna. And these two, they enjoyed the world. They used to stay sometimes under the big tree, the Bodhi tree. But then they would walk away and into the forest to watch the animals and look at the birds and pick flowers and eat fruits. Or they would go down to the ocean and swim in the waters among the fish. Beautiful. They had very fun. They were laughing, they were talking, they were chasing one another, playing all the time, making up songs, tickling one another. At times they used to walk apart to find new places and come back to the big tree and tell their stories to one another. And one of these times, Yamuna had been far, far away. She had been to the desert. And she had seen the strangest things. So she was running back to the great tree. And yes, Yama was there. He was lying on the ground with closed eyes. He was probably exhausted, just as her. Yama, she said, Yama, listen to me. You can't imagine what I've seen. And she started to tell him. But he didn't open his eyes. Come on, what's wrong with you? Listen to me. She tried to tickle him. He enjoyed being tickled, but he didn't react at all. Yama, what's wrong? She tried one of the songs, the one he liked the most, and she sang it beautifully. No response. She took his hand, and it was kind of cold. Yama, what is wrong with you? Well, little did she know that now death was also created and brought into the world, and that her brother was no more. She stayed there. She waited. A long time passed, and at last she realized he wouldn't return. This was just a cold body. And her eyes were streaming of tears. And she opened her mouth and she cried out, Yama! Yama, my brother, he died today! And she screamed so violently, so the sky darkened, there were thunderstorms. The tears from her eyes became a river, overflowing the fields, uprooting trees. The ocean was roaring, huge waves reaching the sky were crashing into land. The mountains were shaking, the world was shivering. And of course the gods, they came out of their hiding places, wondering what was happening. And they could see, down there by the big tree, the grieving woman. And they were worried about the world. The world was at risk. So all the gods, they came streaming down from the mountains and up from the ocean, from everywhere. And they surrounded her. And they talked to her. Yamuna, Yamuna, calm down. Stop screaming. Stop weeping. But she couldn't stop. They tried to console her. They said, you are not alone in the world. We are still here. And all the world is here, the nature, the animals, the birds, everything is still here, except for Yama. But we can't bring him back. Please, calm down. But she couldn't. And what could they do now? Hugging didn't help. Songs didn't help. They walked back up the Himalayas. They were standing on the slopes. They talked to one another. What can we do? She needs some kind of rest. And then one of them got an idea. She said, how about if we create some dark? They didn't really get her. Well, she showed them. She used her magic. And she started to bring down the sun. Down towards the Western Ocean. And suddenly the sky turned yellow and then red and then dark. It was night. The first night ever. And the gods, they looked in amazement. There was a moon up in the sky and stars too. And the silence. All the birds were sitting down in the trees, and they fell to sleep. And most of all, Yamuna was quiet. They could see her by the tree. She was lying down now, and she was asleep for the first time. So the gods, they waited. And they waited. And then they decided to try to bring up the sun again and see what happened. So the sun was now rising in the far east. Rising, rising. The sky getting light again. Birds waking up, starting to sing. And yes, now Yamuna also woke up. And she was standing under the tree watching her brother, his cold body. And she opened her mouth. Yama! Yama! He died yesterday! She screamed. And there were the tears. And there were the rivers and the streams and the shaking of the world. For hours and hours, and the gods, they had to bring down the sun again. To the second night. It was quiet. The world was resting, and so did she. And they brought up the sun again. And Yamuna, she woke up, and again she screamed, but not as violently this time. Yama! Yama, he died the day before yesterday. He died the day before yesterday. She screamed. And day passed, and nights passed, and slowly her wounds were healed. She was still grieving, but through time she could accept her loss. And that is how the gods created the night, and gave us time, and also gave us the seasons, the autumn, the winter, and the dark that has come now to Stockholm, Sweden.
The invention of night also means the invention of another day. And perhaps what I fear most is another day. Another day that I will need another night to forget. Another day to bracket into memory. Another moment to distance myself from in time. Fully knowing that when I wake up again, I will have another incident to deal with. Another distraction. To sweep away the residue of the night before. I fear the next day, because when I sleep in apprehension, knowing that I will not wake up with the tragedy of what was deemed yesterday, but I will have more to unfold under my pillow. Another night, another day. So the silence of the night gives me no restfulness. I fear the dreams that I have at night, where I don't eat and I get fat, where my cat successfully captures so many rats, where I swim underwater only to take pictures for Instagram, where I'm excited about getting a new tattoo that I already have, where I'm traveling and eventually someone stops me to ask about my visa, where I'm driving fast and I fully know that I don't have a license, where I'm sexy and no one notices, where I'm gentle and people perceive my actions as abrasive, where I'm diplomatic and my cat still eats me, where everything is always under a bright gaze, a spotlight, and life is one continuous day that I can't escape. In the early 1990s, a team of Russian astronomers and engineers proposed to turn the darkness of night into the brightness of one continuous day. They argued strongly that this would save the Earth from the extended expenses of electricity at night. They made beautiful and innovative designs to send a giant mirror to space that would reflect light back to the Earth at night, erasing our fears of darkness. It sounded beautiful, efficient, and very smart. Life would once again be an eternal day. While the motives behind their proposal was efficiency, they were far from spiritual. This planetary intervention they were proposing was driven by the need to extend the working day, enabling laborers to work throughout the night while cutting back on the production costs. The project failed. It was met with resistance. Different organizations, international and cultural bodies, argued that the sky was a commons, a communal space that not one entity could own nor change. Throughout the history of humanity, many civilizations used the sky culturally to gaze into its vastness, to reflect on the relationship of their time on Earth in relation to the universe, to be fully aware there was always something in the horizon that was unseen, unknown, yet simultaneously navigate their footsteps on the landscape of this Earth through the reading of the stars in the sky. Daylight all night long proposed to erase the darkness of night, but in doing so, it would delete the notion of the sky, and as a result, it would erase any bodily, physical, human experience we had in relation to the universe. It would obliterate any time we have for meditation and reflection, but most importantly, it would delete the concept of rest. To be under the spotlight constantly is to work without thinking, and therefore to lose the night would mean to lose one's compass of living and entirely lose our human notion of space and time. Later in the 90s, the internet was invented, and our concept of time changed without the need for such physical interventions into outer space. With the internet, working hours were seamlessly extended, and outsourcing became the verb. Outsourcing became the noun and adjective that described all-night daylight extension. While someone in one part of the world is sleeping, someone in the other half of the world is awake and working. And no matter day or night, someone was always working. And no matter day or night, someone on this earth was always consuming. Since the explosion in Beirut on August 4th, 2020, many questioned the concept of resilience. Is it empowering or is it numbing? Is it absurd to celebrate our ability to wake up and try to make the best out of the very worst of situations, rebuild again, while fully knowing that what we build is not a material agent towards dictating and imagining our future. And materials can be resilient substances or objects that can spring back into shape. They can be elastic. In other words, resistant and flexible given the right conditions. Materials are chemical compounds, so there are no accidents. There are only predictable formulas waiting for the right triggers to happen. But psychologically, for humans, resilience is the ability to mentally and emotionally cope with a crisis and to return to pre-crisis status quickly. But in our case, our pre-crisis status was a crisis that we had already adapted to, a new normal that we affirmatively wanted to reject and found ourselves adjusting to. So, we were always already in a place of crisis. And with every new crisis, our resilience seems to signal a return to the crisis that we already are familiar with. بيروت، حيفا، رام الله، القدس، عمان، بغداد، إقرث، دمشق، حمص، ليبيا، القاهرة، سيناء، Yemen. They say we can't predict the weather. We can't see for certain when the next hurricane will happen. We know Katrina and Maria, so we prepare ourselves for what we think will be Javier and Mercedes, Johnson, Google, and Ford. But we know that our actions have consequences. We know that our actions are chemicals, materials. But wait, this is not a hallucination. This is a reality.